Hi, and welcome to week 4 of English Composition 1. Last week we talked about developing the body of an essay to support your thesis statement. We brainstormed a number of supporting points and arguments, and then we chose the ones that made the strongest case for our thesis statement. So if you remember last week, I did an example. My thesis statement was, the story of the Exodus clearly foreshadows the work of Christ. And so after brainstorming a number of possible supporting points, I picked the 3 I thought were the strongest. One was the Passover lamb represents Christ himself. The second one was through one man, God rescues his people from bondage. And the third one was rescue itself is not the goal is to know God and to live in relationship with him. So this week, we're talking about a couple of things. We're talking about how to organize your supporting points so they make the most sense, because not every way of organizing your essay or your supporting points is going to work as effectively. And then we'll also talk about using transitions between ideas. So let's talk about organization first. Okay, I've got my 3 supporting points, and I sit down and I think, which order would make the most sense to my reader? Since I'm focusing on the story of the Exodus, what I think makes the most sense is doing a chronological order, just following through the story of the Exodus, because the reader is going to be able to, especially those readers that are familiar with the story, that's going to make the most logical sense to them. It's going to also seem less random. Instead of just this idea, that idea, this idea, we see a progress, logical progress through the story of the Exodus. So if I do it in that order, my thesis statement is still the same, obviously. The story of the Exodus clearly foreshadows the work of Christ. Now I have my supporting arguments in this order. 1, through one man, God rescues his people from bondage, because I'm going to start talking about the calling of Moses and how he helps God rescue the Israelites from bondage, and comparing that to Jesus. My supporting argument number 2 will be the Passover lamb represents Christ himself. So if you think about the logical progression, we've got the selection of Moses and then the plagues and the Passover. And then, of course, the last part of the Exodus would be the actual leaving of Egypt, the deliverance to the promised land. So my 3rd supporting argument would be the rescue itself is not the goal is to know God and to live in relationship with him. So that seems to make the most sense. Okay, secondly, we talked about transitions. And in the notes, we talked about transitions as kind of mortar between bricks, taking things that are not connected and making sure they connect and make a whole. Or we talked about them as bridges or signposts between ideas so that your readers can easily follow you from one idea to the next. They don't get stranded and wonder, how is this connected to what you were just saying? Okay, so here I'm just going to do something very simple. I'm just going to use first of all, secondly, and finally. There are a great many ways that you can do transitions. And if you look at the web page that I've linked to this week's course content page, you'll see some specific suggestions. So anyway, another purpose for transitions is just to remind your readers that everything connects back to the thesis statement, okay? So if I just put those in, we have, first of all, in both cases, God rescues his people from bondage through one man. Secondly, the Passover lamb represents Christ himself. And finally, we see in both biblical stories that rescue itself is not the goal. The goal is to know God and to live in relationship with him. Okay, so just using transitions, even if they're as simple as first, second, third, or if they're more sophisticated, it really takes the whole, it takes the various points and it connects them into one whole. Instead of, if you don't use transitions, sometimes the effect is somewhat random and scattered, but here we've kind of put it all together into one logical flowing body of the essay. Okay, and that's a good thing. So next week, we will be talking about how to write the introduction and the conclusion. Now that we have the body of the essay down, and you're going to be working on that this week, then next week, like I said, we'll talk about how to finish the essay by adding those 2 pieces.